senior foreign policy writer at the magazine Newsweek. Tom, this issue of heavy weapons, there's some military analysis that says 500 Javelin missiles are worth about 3 to 5 days of fighting, that the howitzers that the West has provided to Ukraine only make up about 3% of artillery that Ukraine's army has at its disposal. So why is there so much reluctance? I mean, Zelenskyy asks every single day for that heavy weaponry.
Yeah, well, I think that, we're hearing two lines coming out of President Zelenskyy. I think it's part of an effort to keep control of the narrative of this conflict. One says that, of course, Ukraine is winning this war. The Russians are losing. They will lose. And the other line says that we need these weapons or we will lose this war. And of course, I think that part of that is to broadcast, one, to the Ukrainian people that this is a conflict that they can win and are winning. And the other one is to broadcast to the world that, no, we still need your support. And I think that other countries, especially NATO countries, including the United States and Germany, want to keep still somewhat distance from the actual fighting itself. This is a story that's been told at the beginning of this conflict, lead up to this conflict. And I think that the U.S. and certain other countries, and especially Ukraine, have been able to win over some support. We saw some movement in the German position earlier on when it came to certain sorts of weaponries. But as the asks get bigger to larger weapons and larger equipment, there is still that concern. That's something that the Russians are really trying to exploit in this. I spoke with the Russian ambassador not that long ago, who said that any Western convoys in Ukraine could serve as a pretext for a NATO-Russia clash. That's something that Russia wants to amplify to keep those fears alive.
Tom, what do you think might happen if, as many people are saying, there's not going to be a definitive victor in this battle for Donbass, as President Zelenskyy calls it? Does that force a Russian withdrawal from the area? They can't occupy eastern Ukraine with a long standoff with the Ukrainians on the other side of any sort of line of control, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, well, I mean, this area of Ukraine has been at war since 2014. We've seen quite a few frozen conflicts in Europe involving Russian troops and separatists. So there is very much that concern that this could be a protracted crisis going on for months, perhaps even years. I think that's something that President Biden has also looked to voice that to his audience, saying that this is not something we should necessarily expect will resolve overnight. And as I think the war gets into a phase now where perhaps it's the perception is that Russia might be pursuing more limited aims, it could also put some stress on that broad coalition of sanctions and opposition to Russia within the U.S.'s own camp. And I think that you could see certain countries starting to say, well, look, Russia is no longer pursuing regime change. Now they just want Donbass. Can't you just give that up? And of course, for President Zelenskyy, that's politically toxic. That seems completely out of the realm of reality. But there are difficult decisions that will have to be made. That's something that he's acknowledged. But the question is, how does this transition to another phase in this conflict affect negotiations? We haven't seen major progress there. Will Western powers encourage President Zelenskyy to negotiate? Can they encourage him to do so? And will Russia tolerate that? Will they still pursue those maximalist goals, or will they aim for that more limited end to this conflict, or at least some sort of ceasefire?
Do you think there's any truth in the fact that the Russians may be pushing their strategies a little bit faster than they would like, according to their top military generals, because of Vladimir Putin thinking about May the 9th and that traditional big parade that happens in Moscow's Red Square every 9th of May when Russia celebrates its defeat of Nazi Germany, that he might be looking at that date as something that he needs to show, I've achieved something in Ukraine, and tell his people that?
Well, I think there's certainly a narrative out there that could be the case. I think there's a lot of symbolism attached to that, especially given the denazification line of reasoning coming out of Russia for this conflict. I think that certainly would seem important. But I think that no matter what, Russia has shown a tendency to broadcast its narrative of this conflict to its people with a relative degree of success. Of course, we do see opposition to this in Russia, but nothing so significant that would threaten Russia's actual messaging of this war within the country itself. And to some of its allies as well. So I wouldn't necessarily go and say that the entire strategy is being driven by this date upcoming, but I would look up to it for potential opportunities, perhaps, to find some sort of limited settlement or something that Russia can walk away and say, listen, we achieved our aims in this conflict, and of course those aims are subject to interpretation, but I think it's something that we should certainly keep an eye out for, especially if there is any opportunity there for diplomacy as we get closer to that date.
Tom, you know, we always appreciate your analysis. Thank you so much indeed. Tom O'Connor.
Thank you.